If you ever decide to go homeless, don't choose New York City because it is cold. So there were many nights where I experienced physical hunger. It was just freezing temperatures. And thankfully, the thing that the Lord at that point, I didn't know the Lord at that point, but I believe that he was already showing me his grace and tapping me on the shoulder. A little bit on me, and I want to jump into a story that really speaks about three pillars that have been a theme in my life. And it's the way the Lord is used my talents and my blessings in the marketplace. And so for the past 2 decades, I've been knocking food out of people's hand and getting them to call on the Lord as they're out of breath. I've been in the fitness and nutrition space for the past 23 years. Initially, when I started doing that, it was a very superficial idea behind fitness. I thought if everyone had a six-pack, then that's all they needed. Well, the Lord had other plans. And so I'll talk to you a little bit more about how that all came to be, but really this is a story of redemption and a story in where I believe God uses the good and the bad in our lives to really teach us things. And I'm a Bible student, but I also believe that through our lives, he speaks to us. And so this story of redemption starts off by really talking to you guys about our buckets. I believe we all have a bucket, and at some point in time, we start to fill that bucket with all the wrong things. At least that's what I did for the first 31 years of my life. I went out into the world to chase things because I thought that would make me happy. And boy, was I wrong. Boy, was I wrong. There's a scripture that really exemplifies the message today, and it really speaks to everything I'm going to be sharing with you guys today. And it's Hosea chapter 4, verse 6. And it says, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I reject you from being a priest to me. And since you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children." When I look at that verse and I think of the word knowledge, I also think of the word clarity. Because in order for us to understand things, we have to see things. And when I see here, it says, because you have rejected, there was an opportunity to accept, but these people decided to reject. It's speaking directly to Israel, but it's also speaking to those of us who have rejected the truth, and because of that, we're in rebellion. I was a recipient of that rejection. I was born to two parents that didn't know the Lord. My mom was a professional singer. My dad was a third-generation mafia boss in Colombia, and as you can imagine, that was rough. And so at some point, my mother was fed up with all the violence that was going on, and she decided to take off when I was 1. So we came to the United States when I was 1 with my 7-year-old sister. We settled in a tiny apartment in Jamaica, Queens, and my mom had to make ends meet, so she went back to singing. That's what she did best. That's all she knew how to do, and this brought her into a very toxic environment. We're talking now 1979, 1980. A little bit of background. In American history, there was a time here, an era here called the Colombian Bonanza. And it was a very dark time in the history of the world, but especially America. And it's when the Colombian cartels came to the United States and just inundated the U.S. with drugs. Bad combination. Drugs, disco music, it was chaotic. And so my mother, as a professional singer, she went back to the nightclubs. And some of the guys that would congregate there were guys that were up to no good. They were mafia guys. And they saw this young, beautiful woman who was, trying to raise 2 kids. And so they wanted to help her. So they brought her into the business. And the way she came into the business was by being a house bank. Obviously, these organizations can't house their money in legitimate banks, so they use homes. And very modest homes, to not raise any kind of suspicion. So we were one of those homes. And large amounts of money would be dropped off at our house, and a man would come and count the money. My mother would count the money, put it in these brown little bags, these sandwich bags, and we would see, I remember as a kid, I would see piles of money all the way to the ceiling in certain rooms that we weren't allowed to walk into, but of course, as a kid, I would walk in there all the time. And so My mother did that for about 3 years, and quote unquote, she did it well. So she went through the ranks of the mafia, and from 1981 to 1992, she ran some of the biggest crews in New York City. We lived in luxury, but we lived in misery. Our homes were constantly raided. I was changing schools every 2-3 months. So in 1 year, I could go to 3-4 different schools. I developed learning disabilities and a ton of other situations based on all the trauma that I was experiencing. And so in 1992, my mother was indicted by the Southern State of Manhattan for all the charges that she had accumulated. So she would either go to court and go to jail for 25 years or flee. So she decided to flee. She wrote a letter to the judge and she said, I would stay and pay for what I've done, but I have 2 young children and I'm not going to leave them. I'm not going to leave them, so I'm just going to flee. She got on a plane. We all went back to Colombia in a very, very difficult time of Colombian history. This is 1992 when the notorious Pablo Escobar was being prosecuted by 4 different agencies. The city was in complete chaos. Bombs were going off consistently, 2-3 bombs throughout the day, shootouts. There were curfews. You had to be home by 6. I was a young kid, and it was a dangerous, dangerous environment. So my mom decided that it was best for me to come back to the States and stay with some friends that were supposed to care for me, but they were also in the same business. So I came back to the States, and I encountered the same exact kind of chaos that I was used to. And I stayed at that home for about 3 months, and I finally got fed up and said, I'm done. So I packed up 2 bags I had, and I walked out the door. And ironically, at the age of 14, for 14 months, I was homeless in the streets of New York City. Now, homeless is homeless, and it's hard for anyone. But when you're coming from abundance, even though we were in misery, there was abundance. We lived in big homes, and we had all these luxuries and all these things. And from going to that to being in the street and trying to figure out, where am I going to sleep tonight? What am I going to eat? Was rough. If you ever decide to go homeless, don't choose New York City because it is cold. So there were many nights where I experienced physical hunger. It was just freezing temperatures. And thankfully, the thing that the Lord at that point, I didn't know the Lord at that point, but I believe that he was already showing me his grace and tapping me on the shoulder. And what he did for me in that time was that he gave me great talent playing soccer. I was a very talented soccer player. And so I ended up going to a place called Flushing Meadows Park in New York City, where most of the amateur soccer is played. And I started to play, and guys started to know me, and my teammates started to find out the situation that I was going through. And I started to stay at different teammates' homes, and that made things a little easier, but it was still rough. 14 months of being completely alone. In that time, I learned some of the most incredible lessons that I've ever learned. I learned to be grateful for everything. To this day, when I put a plate in front of me, I am thankful because I remember when food was scarce. And it taught me to be resilient. It taught me to be gritty. Fast forward a couple of years, I went into back into my parents, actually my aunt, who took me in, and things settled down for a little bit. Soccer started to really look up for me. A lot of teams were asking about me. In one particular situation, I was in a competition, and a scout approached me with my coach, and he said, "We'd like to take you to Spain to try out." Now, I don't know how familiar you guys are with soccer, but playing in Spain is like playing here in the NBA. It's a dream come true. So the guy says, would you like to come to Spain and try out? Let me look at my agenda and see if I'm available, right? I said, of course. So I jumped in a plane and I went to the north of Spain to a city called Zaragoza, right in between Madrid and Zaragoza and Barcelona. And I went to this place called La Ciudad Deportiva, which means the sports city. And this is where the amateur teams and the pro teams trained. So they threw me on the pitch, and in 7 minutes I was pulled aside, and in a little napkin they wrote my contract, my very first contract. and I felt like I had arrived, right? And so I stayed in Spain. It was amazing. I got to play with a lot of guys that I had seen on TV, that I admired, that I looked up to. And I was there for 3 years, but because of the situation that was happening at the time in the team was doing really, really well. There were 4 foreigners. I would have been the 5th foreigner. I was always kept in the Division II team. So I had an opportunity to go to Mexico and actually play on a team there and start. So I ended up getting shipped off to Guadalajara, Mexico, a team called Tecos, and I played there for 3 years. Things went really, really well. But some way, somehow, my life would always go back to the same. The guy who bought my player pass was actually a big mafia guy. He was an agent, but his real job was as a mafia guy. I didn't know anything about this. So he bought my pass, and things were looking good. I had, everything I had always wanted, and I started dating his niece. Sinful relationship. I didn't know that at the time. And I fell in love, and I thought things were going to be great. One day, in a party, he pulled me aside, and he said, my niece is a medical student, and she's not going to marry a soccer player, a womanizing soccer player. She's going to marry another doctor. So he says, I'm warning you. He says, stay away from her. But I was pretty in love, and I thought that, I could just keep doing what I was doing, and he would never find out. So sure enough, a couple of months later, 3 Tahoes pulled up to my house at 8 o'clock in the morning. I lived in a townhouse that belonged to that agent. So he had a key. I heard some people coming in. I looked, and I saw 10 really big, scary men and him in front coming into the apartment. They walked into the apartment. They went up to the 2nd floor. He opened the door. He told me to stand up, smacked me over the head, and said, you have 24 hours to leave the country or else. And he ended my soccer career. He owned all of my player rights. So I came back to the States. 9 months of depression. If you've ever seen a professional athlete lose their career, it's really hard. I had absolute passion for nothing else. This is all I knew how to do. There were 5 professional soccer players in my family, and I thought I was going to have a successful career. Here I am at 23, and my career is done. So I come back to the States. I end up in Tampa, Florida, and for 9 months I would wake up every morning and I would wish that I had never woken up. It was a very, very, very difficult time. But one day I woke up and I said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I'm going to go do even better than I did when I was playing soccer. And I started to take inventory of my talents and my blessings and all the things that I knew I had. And in that, I had played with professional athletes. I had trainers, dietitians, physical trainers. And I said, I can do this. I think I can be a great trainer. So I opened up a tiny little studio in Tampa, Florida, 400 square feet. I mean, tiny, 400 square feet, right? And my idea there was that I wanted to do things very differently. I wanted to really provide change for people. And so right off the bat, we knew 2 things. We wanted to bring a great product to the marketplace, and number 2, we wanted to differentiate ourselves from the competition. The way we went about that was making nutrition the number 1 component. People would come to our gym ready to jump on the floor, get a membership, and we would redirect them towards our nutrition programs. And we became really, really well known. So that 400 square foot little facility went from being a 400 square foot facility to a 7,000 square foot facility with trainers, and we had some of the most important people in Tampa coming to our studio. We built up a really, really successful business. And with that success came lots of bad habits. I was a man of the world. I didn't grow up with a dad. I had never been to church. I went to Catholic church, but it didn't really impact my walk in any way, shape, or form. And so I was told that if I had enough money and I could be somebody, that I would be happy and I'd be filled. So I went out to the world chasing that so hard, and I accomplished all of these things. All these things came to pass. I had the cars, the houses, I had a couple rental properties. My business was scaling more and more. We had plans to franchise our gyms. But there was a huge hole in my heart, and I couldn't understand why. because everything I had been told that I would be happy and that I would be filled and that I would be joyful was a lie. I was super empty. And so, sure enough, one day I woke up and I was really depressed mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I was writing a letter to my sister telling her I was going to check out. And I remember writing the letter, and as I was writing that letter, this guy that I had bumped into to a couple of times on Saturdays, I would bump into him on the elevator, and he was a young guy, good looking, he had a beautiful wife, and I would see him every Saturday with a Bible under his arm like this, coming back from church. He was coming back from church. I was on my way to get faded into the night. And it always shocked me because even though I knew nothing about God, he genuinely struck me as a very, very positive guy. There was something about him. I couldn't put my finger on it. But there was something so great about his energy, and I was like, man, that guy, he's going to church. So I would mess with him all the time. And I would say, put that Bible down, right? Let's go party. And he would look at me and say, he said, I left that life behind a long time ago. He says, you should come to church with me. And like every other person in the world, I would, respond with, the walls will cave in. And he's like, no, man, you should come. So anyway, that morning when I was hungover and ready to check out, I decided to call that guy. And I remember saying to him, I said, I don't think I have another 2 days in me. I don't know what you can do for me, but I felt like I needed to call you. So he said, don't do anything silly. He ran downstairs. He sat across from me. And he said, with all the enthusiasm, he said, let me tell you what God is doing in my life. And I looked at him and I said, you're going to have to give me something else because I don't believe in God. And he looked at me straight in the eye as if he were speaking about gravity. And he said, God is all I have for you. He said, and if you don't pay attention, he says, you will take your life. And he shared the gospel with me. And I kind of looked at him like he had 4 heads. And I said, adults believe that? He was very serious, and he said, oh, yeah. And he says, I said, well, what do you want me to do with that? He says, well, what are you doing tonight? I said, well, I was going to kill myself, but if you have better plans, we'll go do that, right? I was very serious. So he invited me to church, and I reluctantly got in his car. We went to church. I had never been to an evangelical church. We walked in, and I saw at the time 2 things that I loved, Starbucks and pretty women. And I said, Jesus, this is Jesus, right? And so as I walked into the sanctuary, everyone was nice, and they were greeting me. That day, Pastor Craig Altman was preaching on the book of Job. And everything he said about Job resonated with me. The only thing, I wasn't a righteous man, but everything about the story of Job resonated with me. I felt like I had arrived, I had everything, and here I was in a time of testing. And so once the service was over, I looked at my buddy, I said, okay, that was cool. I said, let's go. He said, let's go to the prayer team. So right after service, they would have some guys up front like they do here. I walked up to this young guy who looked like he had been a Christian all his life. And he said, what are we praying for? And I just unleashed. And he just kind of looked at me like, wow. He said, close your eyes. And I literally checked out from the minute he said, close your eyes, because I was so embarrassed and I wanted no one to see me there asking for help. I had been brought up in an environment where men don't cry. I was raised by street soldiers, and it was a very rough environment. So here I am in front of this guy, and I checked out, so it wasn't an emotional response because I have no idea what he said. All I know is that I felt like I had put my finger in a socket. And I felt energy coming through my body, and I started to bawl like a baby. Couldn't understand why I was crying, but I felt relief. And I turned around, I thanked him, I walked out the door, and as I was walking out the door, I heard the most encouraging words I have heard in my entire life. Like I said, I didn't grow up with a dad. And this older man with sort of a fatherly figure came up to me, and he said, son, why are you crying? I started crying all over again. And I said, I have no idea. He said, I have a gift for you. He handed me a Bible. It was just the New Testament. And I said, where do I start? And he said, start in the book of John. So I said, where's that? So he opened it up for me. And I remember I took it, and I put a little paper over it, put it away. I walked away. I thanked him. My buddy who had invited me to church was coming right behind. He knew that pastor. And 2 years later, I found out the conversation they had. That pastor said to my friend, he said, that guy's going to get it. I don't know what he saw in me that made him think I was going to get it, because I was a mess. But I walked out of that church and my life progressively got better. I, by the grace of God, never had to go to any of the programs to get rid of dependencies. I remember the very next day waking up and looking in the mirror, and it was interesting because what I would see prior to this experience, I would look in the mirror and I would feel shame. I knew that there was something in me that could do better, but I just didn't know how. That morning I woke up and I felt like the person I was looking to in the mirror was a different person. I felt like a 2,000-pound gorilla had come off my shoulders. I felt light. And my life continued to get better. I got rid of all of the dependencies. I went back to my successful business. I looked at my business partner and I said, I'm done. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I'm done. I said, I don't know what happened to me the other day, but I need to go figure it out. So I gave away my business basically for $25,000. To give you an idea, one of the pieces of equipment at the gym was $25K. So I gave away all my book of clients, all my equipment, and I locked myself in a condo for 2 years. And all I did was study the Word of God, pray, fast, and ask God to repurpose my life. And I kept being told at church that I needed faith to please God, but my mind also needed some answers. And so I started to get into historical Jesus. I devoured the book of Josephus, even though he talks very little about Jesus. But I wanted to know that he was a real man, that he'd actually walked the earth. I started to look at cultural Judaism, like what were they saying and why were they using all these farming terms? And I started to break everything apart. And it was real interesting, guys, because I had tried to read the Bible before and I had never understood the Bible. I tossed the Bible across the room many times because I was frustrated because people kept saying it'll change your life, and I would read it and I couldn't understand it. But for the very first time, it was like the words that I was reading were coming alive. And it was almost like, I don't know if you've seen in a movie when they show like the text coming off of the paper. And I felt like that text just kept coming into my heart. And I kept breathing lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. And it was the very first time that I had clarity. The Bible gave me clarity. You're going to hear me talk about this concept. These 3 concepts we've woven into our programs. He gave me clarity, and with that clarity, he allowed me to incorporate disciplines, which were my disciplines of fasting and praying and just consistently devouring the word, fasting. And in those 2 years of desert time, that 2 year sabbatical that I took, the Lord was just amazing. I gave away all these things that I thought I had in the world. And in those 2 years, it's almost like he took away those things that I was dependent on in the world, the money, the influence, the relationships. He took all that stuff away so that I could fully depend on him. And it was full dependence. I wasn't making money. I was living off my savings. I gave up. I deleted over 300 phone numbers off of my phone of people that just weren't bringing anything positive to this new life. And I met a mentor that said, he says, you don't need to date anyone. He says, you need to date Jesus. And I said, well, how am I supposed to marry and settle down? And he said something really profound. He said, do you think 4 walls are going to keep the God that created the heavens and the earth from bringing a wife to you? I said, that makes sense. So sure enough, in those 2 years, I met my wife. We dated for 3 months. On month 4, we got married. We've been married now for 12 years. It's given us 2 amazing, amazing daughters. And there's so much peace, guys. My peace is not dependent on my circumstances. There's this peace that just surpasses all understanding. So with that relationship, God gave me that clarity. God gave me the discipline. And God has given me the consistency to persevere through hard times, because, of course, we all know that we still face hard situations in this world. This is a fallen world. And so in this time of my sinful life, and then coming into a relationship with the Lord, the Lord really showed me that in order to lead powerfully, you have to be indwelt by the Holy Spirit. There's a lot of fake leadership in the world. There's a lot of fake it till you make it type of people out there. But that clarity and that discipline and that consistency, those three pillars that will allow any leader to excel, are empowered by the Spirit of God. It's only then that we truly have a vision for our lives, for our ministry. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think it's important to remember these things. I think also what I hear a lot with people that are in ministry is that you guys have the presence of God and His grace and His mercy, and oftentimes we forget. We just forget. It's just normal now, right? And so that's why I think it's important to revisit these ideas, and more importantly, to revisit that vision. Like, what is my vision for my ministry, for my marriage, for my parenting? And then applying strategic habits to that clarity, which is now what we teach our nutrition clients. And I'm going to get into that here in a little bit. But a leader, a true leader, is empowered by the Spirit of God. It's been real interesting because God has used this realm of fitness and nutrition in a very interesting way. We like to say we're a nutrition company, but we're really an evangelical movement that disguises as a nutrition company. And we're respectful. People come to us for needs, felt needs, like, there's overeating, binge eating, addiction, obesity, all these different things that plague people. And we give them what they come for. But interestingly enough, in a very stealth way, not because we're apologetic about our faith, but because we're very wise in how we talk about our faith. It's very much woven into everything we do, into the fabric of our product. That I look back, and oftentimes when I talk to churches and leaders and I tell them that this is a ministry, I almost feel like Paul, when Paul went to speak over there to the Greeks, to the Epicureans and the Stoics, and they said, what does this babbler have to say, right? Oftentimes in Christianity, it's almost like a cliche. It sounds like it's not for taking care of the temple of the Holy Spirit, is not for this side of eternity. The Lord has shown me different. The Lord has shown me that it is a biblical command. Romans chapter 12, verse 1 says that we are to live as a holy, living sacrifice to the Lord. And that means in all ways. I don't think Paul was talking about a six-pack, but he certainly was talking about stewardship in all areas. And so this is what he has taught me. In 1 Timothy 4:8, he says, for bodily training is of some value. He says, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise to the present life and also for the life to come. I don't think Paul is saying that we should throw the physical aspect aside. I think there's a hierarchy of ideas. Godliness comes first. But man, taking care of our temple is so, so important. So important. I have a question for you. If maybe as you hear this, you doubt and you go, I don't know, JT. I don't know that it has any value. I'll just ask you this question. If you're unhealthy, do you feel like sharing the gospel more? If you feel sick and tired, do you feel like you have the energy to go and reach out to people and serve people? I think we all know the answer here. And so I believe that when our temple is healthy, we can go out and we can do amazing things for the Lord exponentially. And this has been how I've been able to come back to this industry, because I didn't want to come back to this industry because I thought it was such a superficial thing. I thought, people just come here to get abs, but not Jesus. But here's what's interesting. In our gyms, in our nutrition programs, we say all the time that we lead more people to the Lord doing squats and lunges than most churches any Sunday. And the way we do that is because when we have that connection with people, when we've actually been able to provide value, when we've built that rapport with people, now we're in close quarters and we have their attention. And we've approached them in a very, very stealth way that allows us to really get into those intrinsic things, those things where we can actually come in and speak about the Lord. It's been a very, very powerful way to approach evangelism. And it's all come from the Lord repurposing my talents, giving me clarity, giving me the disciplines, the things I wake up every day and do, and then providing the consistency to continue to do it even when things get boring, when things get stale. And so I talk all the time about being tactical, right? You hear these ideas and you're probably thinking, okay, well, that sounds good. How do I apply clarity? Maybe you've had that clarity in the beginning of your walk, but now it's getting a little blurry. It's been a while. You get up, you do the same thing every day. You feel like you serve, and maybe that clarity has become a little blurry for you. Recently, I get up early. I get up at 3 a.m. That's when I do my devotional time. And you're probably asking, what time do you go to bed? I get to bed at 8:30. I'm in bed, right? So I'm an early riser. And I was in Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 through 24. You guys know this scripture well. This is the fruits of the Spirit. And as I was reading the fruits of the Spirit, I was like, man, that's so cool. How do we apply that? How do we grow in progressive sanctification? How do we speed through that? I want some of that. And so it says Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 through 24. It says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. When I look at that verse, the first thing I see is that the first fruit of the Spirit is love. And the last fruit of the Spirit is self-control. And so as I was praying and asking the Lord, well, how does this come into my life? How do I apply this to my life? I've never heard from the Lord audibly, but I feel like he imposed upon me the idea that love and self-control sort of hug all of these other fruits. And so when you say love who? Well, then we go to Mark chapter 12, verse 29 through 31, where Jesus says, the most important is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Second is to love thy neighbor. And so how do we progress through those fruits of the Spirit? Well, it starts with intimacy, the intimacy with the Father, and really mainly focusing on that connection with your Heavenly Father, because as you do that, when that love, he teaches us true love. We love him, he loves us, and we can love others. We experience joy. So if you have love, you experience joy. If you experience joy, you experience peace. If you experience peace, you can experience patience. If you experience patience, you can experience kindness. You can experience kindness, you can experience goodness. You can experience goodness, then you can experience faithfulness, gentleness, and with gentleness comes self-control. So how do I revive my clarity so that I can come back into my ministry and lead well? Because maybe things have gotten a little stale. You go back to the original plan, which is to love the Father, to be in intimacy with the Father, to fall in love again with that first love. And as we do that, all these gifts start to unleash into our lives. And then we have self-control. So you go through love and you end in self-control. A person that is filled with the Spirit of God, that has self-control, is a powerful Christian. All of those fruits, I believe, are important. But when you actually start off with intimacy with the Father, he brings back that clarity. Those disciplines come back. That consistency comes back. It's like he revives you. And so that personal devotional time, that intimacy with God, is ultimately what will bring back that passion that maybe you had in the beginning, and that as we go, it can get a little tiring and sometimes we forget. Our ministry is a ministry of nutrition. We teach people how to implement proper nutrition into their lifestyles. In that process of implementing proper nutrition, we also touch on the cognitive aspects of nutrition. So we're not just talking about mechanics. We're not just telling people eat this, don't eat that. Of course, we give people plenty of direction from that perspective. But the idea really is to teach them how to deal with the triggers, the temptation, how to eat at restaurants, how to eat at hotels. But the overarching idea of what we do, whether they're believers or not believers, is that mechanics, counting macros, calories, points, all the thing that the diet world does, is not sustainable. Because that's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches. And so we say that food is actually an idol. We have quoted this many times. We say that the Christian crack is food. We sort of leave the things of the world, and then this is how we do fellowship. And so we're on a mission to really teach everyone how to eat properly, but really Christians, bring in an understanding that there is a spiritual battle and that the enemy works in blatant secrecy. What do I mean by that? He takes things that are that God gave us to enjoy, and he perverts them, such as food and intimacy with our spouse and these things that were meant for good. He's an artist at twisting things. And food is that thing that most of us Christians have never paid attention to because we don't see it as a biblical command. We don't think it's for this side of eternity. In these 14 years of walking with the Lord, this is why he's brought me back into this industry. I wanted to go off and do something else, but he pulled me back in, and this is our ministry. Our ministry is really to teach Christians how to steward the temple of the Holy Spirit, how to incorporate proper nutrition, how to look at it from the perspective of being able to enjoy food, but at the same time glorify God. And I believe that as leaders, when you guys actually step up and say, I want to pay attention to this, you start transforming yourselves, people are watching. People are watching. There's a lot of people that watch you guys. You're constantly being watched by others. And we are communal learners, so we learn from each other. Pastor Will recently came onto our program, and can I share how much weight he lost? 35 pounds he's lost. 35 pounds. That's not an easy thing to do. And when you hear that, you think, well, yeah, that's just physical. But he's showing up different in life. He's more connected, and these are things that he's shared with me. He's getting up, and he's getting into his devotional, and he's reigniting that relationship and becoming very clear around his mission and his ministry. And I think the same is available for you guys. So I just want to leave you with this. I believe that food is a spiritual thing, hence the reason we say grace when we eat. I believe that two of the most visited themes inside of the Bible are money and food. All 66 books, you see it all over the place. I don't think that was just put in there because I believe the Lord, that's a holy thing, that's a spiritual thing, and we should treat it as such. And when we do that, there's an interesting aspect of these physical things. When we actually tame our hunger and we become disciplined in certain areas, it spills over very positively into other areas of our lives. And so through this idea of proper nutrition, when we feel better, we can engage better with God. We can honor him through food. And then that spills over very, very positively into all areas of our lives. And that's what I hope for you guys. And just remember that if you need to reconnect, you need that clarity, you need the disciplines, and you need that consistency. And when you do that and you're indwelt by the Spirit of God, you're a powerful, powerful leader. Thank you, guys.